كما هذه الجدران حمت أهل ديري في شمال إيرلندا. هبت الأمهات هنا لحماية أطفال غزة إثر عدوان إسرائيل في 2008. قاومنا، صمدنا وانتصرنا. حكاية أطفال غزة من قلب ديري في شمال إيرلندا. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. أصدرت هيئة المحلفين في المحكمة الملكية في بلفاست شمال إيرلندا حكم البراءة بحق 9 نساء بعد قيامهن بحركة احتجاجية في منشأة رايثيون في ديري في كانون الثاني يناير 2009. المتهمات واجهن تهما تتعلق بالتجمعات غير المسموحة والدخول عنوة إلى الشركة عندما تظاهرت مجموعة من الأشخاص احتجاجا على المجازر التي ترتكبها إسرائيل في عدوانها على غزة في شتاء 2008-2009 والتي أدت إلى سقوط المئات من الشهداء. معظم القنابل والصواريخ التي استخدمتها إسرائيل في عملية الرصاص المسكوب ضد غزة كانت من صنع شركة رايثيون التي تصنع صواريخ الباتريوت والتوماهوك والكروز والسايد وايندر، إضافة إلى القنابل العنقودية والقنابل الذكية. ومن بين الخدمات التي وفرتها شركة رايثيون لإسرائيل تزويدها بالمعدات الإلكترونية الخاصة بالجدار العنصري العازل الذي تبنيه إسرائيل على الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة. هذا واتهمت الجمعية الوطنية للمحامين في الولايات المتحدة رايثيون بالتورط في ارتكاب جرائم حرب. حملة تضامن إيرلندا فلسطين وفي بيان لها رحبت بقرار هيئة المحلفين ببراءة المتظاهرات ال9. واحدة من هؤلاء النسوة وإحدى أعضاء حلف ديري لمناهضة الحرب الأستاذة الجامعية غوريتي هوريغن تحدثنا عن حركة النساء ال9 التي أدت إلى طرد منشأة رايثيون الأمريكية لصناعة الأسلحة من شمال إيرلندا. Great, Hurricane, welcome to our show, The Inside. Actually, you come from a very cold Irish climate, which is totally different from the hot Irish blood that boils in your veins. How can you explain this vehemence?
Well, I think my mother has a lot to blame, to take the blame for that, because she, although she had 7 children in very poor circumstances, she brought us up to be very strong and to stand up for ourselves, stand up for our rights. And she especially brought her daughters up to be strong women who, you know, would always want to have the best.
Mm-hmm. Now, what does your group, غوريتي, represent?
The Derry Anti-War.
And how did you get involved in it, actually?
Okay, well, I was actually a founder member, and it really started during the first Gulf War, which was back in 1990-91. And then we really opposed the US invasion of Iraq. Mm-hmm. And that was our first, the war against
the Derry Anti-War Coalition.
The Derry Anti-War Coalition set up then. And it was really an alliance of socialists, pacifists, people like the Quakers, and also people who were just against war. And every time that a war breaks out, usually in the Middle East, we mobilise and do as much as we can to try to really make the world hear what's happening, to be the conscience really of the world in terms of what's happening wherever those wars are happening.
Now, during the cast-led operation against Gaza, what happened in Derry, in Northern Ireland?
Well, if you remember, the war started over, the bombardment started over Christmas. It was, Christmas here is a time for family. We were with our children, with our grandchildren, watching them play with their toys, and it was very cold, it was snowing, and we saw on our televisions what was happening to the children of Gaza. So literally just 2 days after Christmas, on the 27th of December, was the first protest here in Derry. It was only maybe 20, 30 people at the War Memorial in the town, but then every day we came back at 3 o'clock every day, we came back to protest again. And every day the numbers grew. So after a while there was hundreds at these protests. And by the Saturday, the first Saturday, we were able to have a funeral, a pretend funeral, for the people who were being killed in Gaza, and especially the children. So we carried a coffin, but also we got baby dolls. We bought some baby dolls, wrapped them in the kafaya and the scarf, and we put some red paint to show why the blood. And then we carried them like we had seen on our television screens, the mothers and fathers of Gaza carrying their children. And so we really tried every way we could to make people understand that what was happening there was just war crime after war crime, and that something had to be done to stop it.
Who are the Raithyon women, غوريتي?
Well, the Raithyon women are 9 women who came together during Operation Cast Lead.
What's your relation with the number 9? I mean, the Raithyon 9, the men, and now the women who are also Raithyon 9.
Okay, the 9 is an accident, because when the men, the Raithyon 9, took their action and then were put on trial, really there were more than 9 of us to start with.
Because actually, yes, Eamon told us in a previous episode that you were joining them. Actually, you were the only women, but then you had to leave home.
Well, when we occupied Raithyon, when the men occupied it, I was with them, and in fact, I knew where the office was when we pushed our way in, because we pushed our way in that first time. I knew where the Raithyon plant was, so I helped them to find it, went in, and then we realised very quickly that once the police arrived, that everybody was going to spend some time in prison. So, because Eamon is my partner, and we have a daughter who's disabled and has needs that only a mother can look after, because she was then 18 years old, and her father couldn't really bath her, for example. We had a very quick conversation and said, I better leave. They did arrest me later, the police, and questioned me, but they didn't charge me. So it ended up with 9 men in the dock, and we felt this wasn't a good representation of the Derry Anti-War Coalition, because we're a very diverse group and a lot of women in the leadership of the coalition. So when, during Operation Cast Lead, we decided that we should have 9 women occupy the next time. Okay, well, the reason for why it was only women was partly because it had been all men the previous time, but also because of the nature of how we were going to do it. When the men went into Raithyon, security was very lax. They really hadn't. We had occupied the place before in 2003 during the American assault on Iraq, and we really had been we had done nothing. It was a propaganda occupation. We went in, we waited for the police to come and take us out again. After the men's action, when they did more than £250,000 worth of damage, a lot of damage, and brought down their mainframe computer and really stopped Raithyon right across Europe and perhaps the world from being able to operate, the security became very, really high security. And every time we had a protest at Raithyon, there were more police there than us, and there was police in riot gear there every time we appeared.
And despite all this, you decided to go inside?
We decided to go inside, but we decided that we would get some women to do it, and the women would sneak in. And really, we did our best to not be seen until we were already actually in the Raithyon building. So that's why women that time, because if they saw 9 men or any number of men coming, the security would have been alerted. They don't expect women to come to do such things.
So what did you do exactly?
Well, unfortunately, we didn't do very much, because we managed to get into the entrance to the office and to cause all of the security to come into play. But they had encased the mainframe computer, which is what we'd come to damage, in steel. So we were left with a situation where we had come prepared to do as much damage as the men, but really all we could do was disrupt operations for an afternoon.
But you chained yourselves?
We chained ourselves to each other.
What does that mean, chaining yourselves to each other?
Okay, well, first of all, we did it because we knew that as women, we didn't have the strength to resist, the physical strength to resist in the same way as the men might have done. And there was we had a real concern that they'd push us out, that the staff there would just push us out the door when we went in. So we thought if we chain ourselves together, and then when we get into the building, we'll chain ourselves to some of the equipment while we're damaging it.
And what did the police do in this sense?
Well, the police were really, I think, quite frightened of us in a funny way, even though we were 9 women, many of whom were, I think 5 of us were grandmothers, but nonetheless they seemed to be afraid to carry us out. And because of the chains, they would have had to coordinate carrying us out. So they, for a while, they negotiated with us, and they asked us, to let them in, etc. We said no, we were going to stay until Raithíon said that they would leave Derry. And then the police said, well, they couldn't get that to happen that day, but was there anything else? So we then said, we will leave if the police agree to investigate the war crimes carried out in Lebanon by Raithíon in Derry, because we understood the connection. We had shown the connection between Raithíon and Derry and the war crimes that had happened in 2006 in Lebanon. We had a court case from the men where the war crimes carried out by Israel using Raithíon weaponry had been accepted by the court. It had been accepted by the court that war crimes were carried out. And yet there had been no investigation of the Raithíon plant in Derry to see what their involvement in these war crimes were. So we said we would leave once the police agreed that they would start this investigation. And they agreed to do this, and they agreed that they would meet us the following week to accept our dossier about what had happened in Lebanon and about the way in which Raithíon was implicated in Israel's war crimes there.
Your goal was to get Raithíon out of Derry and to stop it. However, there was a court case against the Raithíon 9, the men, and there was their acquittal from anything, but it didn't stop Raithíon. What made you so sure that your actions are going to stop?
Okay, well, we wanted really to damage the mainframe computer again, which would have again stopped Raithíon bombs from falling on Gaza for a while, because we knew in between 2006 and 2008-2009, we knew that Raithíon had been working with Israel to produce, for example, a new bunker buster that could be used in built-up areas. We knew that they had produced with Israel, working closely with Israel, that they had produced a new guided missile to be used by tanks. So in other words, to be used in urban areas in very close street fighting. And we thought if we can do anything for even just a couple of days to stop those missiles being able to be used, well, that would be a victory. What we didn't realise was that Raithíon was already starting to feel very insecure in Derry.
In Derry, due to your actions.
Due to our actions, and due to the fact that we were down there a lot. We didn't just, it was not only when we occupied there that we went to protest there.
Yes, we are going to focus more on these actions and your actions, Derry, and your group's actions right after this short break. A short break, and we'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Welcome back, غوريتي. Now, due to these actions that you embarked upon and you've done what you've done, what happened later on? Were you jailed? Were you arrested? And were you charged with anything?
Well, to start with, we weren't arrested. And to start with, it seemed as if...
Because you're women, it
Because
seems.
we're women. We really did think, this isn't fair, we're women, they're not going to jail, they're not going to try us. But obviously Raithíon, within about 6 weeks of our action, Raithíon announced that they were leaving Derry. And then, after that, we had the police contacting us and telling us that they were going to arrest us. and they were going to arrest us and charge us with really the same kind of crimes as they had charged the men with. We thought this was very funny because we...
unlawful assembly and burglary and assault.
Burglary, assault, criminal damage. And we asked them what criminal damage we had caused because we had been quite disappointed we hadn't caused some damage. But it seems that we had hurt, made £80 worth of damage on a little keypad. And this was what really the whole basis, and the fact that we broke in was really the whole basis of their case against us. We were really not very worried about it because we knew that the men had been acquitted, you know, because of their particular defence, and because we were trying to stop a greater crime happening. So we explained to the police that we really thought it would be a waste of public money for them to try us when, you know, the United Nations, the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, many organisations had said that war crimes were underway in Gaza when we undertook the actions that we took, and therefore really...
غوريتي, you come from Deri, Northern Ireland. What made you so much interested in the events that were taking place in the Middle East?
Well, I suppose I've always had a particular interest in Palestine because as a teenager I met Palestinians who explained to me, I lived for a little while in Libya because my father worked there with an oil company, and as somebody from Ireland, we had a very, in the 1960s, 1970s, Irish people had a very odd view of Israel. We saw Israel as a plucky little nation that had fought the British and had been successful. And we really didn't understand that there were Palestinians, you know, what had happened to the Palestinians. We didn't know about the Nakba, we didn't know really about anything like this. We only had the narrative about the sort of Zionist narrative about the foundation of Israel. But when in Libya I met Palestinians who came to our house and visited, and when I talked about going home to Ireland, they talked about how they were never going to be able to go home, and they took out their photographs and they showed me their home in Palestine, and some of them showed me their keys and explained, you know, this is our homeland and we are never, you know, we're refugees from there and we are never going to be able to return. So that really started an interest for me, particularly in the Middle East, but especially with Palestinian issues.
And you are kind of people who believe that the next century is going to be the century of the resistance. How do you explain this?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you look right across the world, really, everywhere we see ordinary people being given a very, very hard time by imperialists, by the way in which the society is organised, and really everywhere across the world, you can see that people are starting to say, well, we are the 99% and they are the 1%, and the 1% who, you know, spend so much money on the arms trade, for example, while children go hungry, while children die of hunger. The 1% who say, you know, back Israel and say that it's okay to take somebody else's country and, you know, not get away with it. The 1% who really say that, you know, they have a right to be the masters of the universe, and that the rest of us...
Just to follow on this point, as the number of dead and maimed in the Middle East just increases and mounts, Raithien recently announced a further growth of revenues and profits. How do you view Raithien's relationship with war crimes?
Well, I really do think that the executives of Raithien really ought to be put on trial for war crimes, along with the Israeli army generals, etc. Because if you look at it, they knew about the war crimes that Israel had committed, for example, in Lebanon in the 1980s, when they gave them their weapons in 2006. They knew in 2008 the war crimes that had been committed in Lebanon in 2006 when they started to produce stuff for Gaza. So the idea that they can say, we know nothing about war crimes, this is clearly not true. And they make their profits really on the blood of the people that are killed by the Israeli forces. So, and they have a very special relationship. This is important for people to understand. Raithien as a company has a very special relationship with Israel. It's not just another arms company, you know, like Boeing or any of these. They have research relationship with them. They actually work with the Israelis have their own arms company, and they work with that arms company to develop specific weapons to meet the particular needs of the Israeli army. And this really is, you know, colluding in war crimes to an extent which no other arms company really does. So they are quite different in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were also acquitted of all the charges. Yes. What did that mean to you?
Well, what it meant was that, again, a court here in Ireland had found that the Israeli war crimes were something which ordinary people should resist, that it was right and legal and lawful for us to commit a crime of breaking into a building, of trying to damage equipment, that was right to do that in order to try to stop the greater crime of what was happening in Gaza in terms of the war crimes there.
Why is the UK taking this role of being so acquiescent to the US policies against the people of the region?
Yeah, I really don't understand it. I don't understand how it's in the UK's interests or Ireland's interests. Ireland is a bit better than the UK in relation to the Middle East, but all of these countries of Europe, really, they're allowing, they have a huge trade with Israel, for example. They allow, I mean, we live in Ireland, where the potato is supposed to be our Irish staple food. And yet when you go into the supermarkets here, you find the shelves full of Israeli potatoes. I just do not understand this. They have to bring them from so far away. It's almost as if they bring.
What about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions?
Yes, well, we regularly carry out actions in order to promote the BDS campaign. And so, for example, we do things like going into Marks and Spencer's, taking all the Israeli food from the shelves, putting them into our trolleys, going to the checkout, and have them check all of the items through, and then we say, no, we're not going to buy them, they're Israeli, they shouldn't be here, they've got blood on their hands. And we do that, I mean, we do it especially at a time when there's a war going on, a particular war like the assault, like Operation Cast Lead, but we also do it on a regular basis now, and with the other supermarkets. And also with the, for example, as a very, here in Northern Ireland, we know that some of our universities have links with not just Israeli universities that exclude Arab students or exclude Palestinian students, which is bad enough, but they actually, and I'm a university lecturer, so this is something that's very important for me, but actually one of our universities helps to develop software which will be used in arms by Israel. So that's something, again, that we work very hard to try to get these universities to divest from and boycott.
Because, you know, some people believe that it's okay to boycott economically, however, not to boycott academically.
Well, we are sort of, as a university lecturer myself and my union, we're my trade union, we're very clear about this, that while individual academics in Israel may be pro-Palestinian and may be doing what they can, for example, to support the BDS campaign themselves, you know, there are links, institutional links between the Israeli government and many universities here in Ireland and in the UK, and those links must be there must be an academic boycott of those kind of links. So it's not about boycotting individual academics who may actually be for BDS and pro-Palestinian. It's about boycotting the institutions, and that academic boycott is something which, you know, really the Israeli government tries to portray in a way, you know, as if there's something sinister about it. No, there's not. Really, no academic should lend themselves to support a state which is, you know,
an apartheid state,
yes,
let's say. Now, do you think that the BDS movement came as a reaction to the political failure?
Well, I think that it came, for us, it came because of the calls that were made by Palestinians for a BDS campaign. Because I don't think it's just that you could say it's a failure of the political process, but rather that it's part of the political process.
غوريتي, Horigan, thanks a million for being our guest tonight.
Thank you.
إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل. كنا معكم من داخل ديري في شمال إيرلندا. إلى اللقاء.